So that's just a few opening words, and I'd like now to turn for our official opening of the event. And I'm very pleased that we have with us to address all of you, Matthew Palmer, Deputy Assistant Secretary of European and Eurasian Affairs for the United States. And Matthew Palmer is going to address the title of this conflict, the Eastern Mediterranean, a sea of conflict or a sea of opportunities. Welcome, Matthew, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, and good morning to those of you in the United States. Good afternoon to those of you in the Mediterranean region. It's really my pleasure to be here to participate in this very important conversation today. The Eastern Mediterranean region is of great importance to the United States. Even as we speak, the U.S. Secretary of State is visiting Greece to reiterate the critical importance of our partnership and the U.S. commitment to prosperity and peace in the region. Earlier this month, Secretary Pompeo spent some time in Cyprus celebrating major gains in our defense and security partnership. And the Secretary was also in Israel just last month as part of our effort to support Israel's historic new relationship with the UAE and Bahrain. The United States views the Eastern Mediterranean as a coherent strategic space, and our vision for the region is one of stability, prosperity, shared interests, and shared values. On the one hand, we aim to enhance our relationships with key regional partners to promote stability and prosperity for all. On the other hand, the challenges we and our allies and our partners face in the region are deep and profound. We are competing for positive influence against the destabilizing actions of malign actors like Russia and the People's Republic of China. So, Eastern Mediterranean, is it a sea of conflict or a sea of opportunities? The United States believes that the Eastern Mediterranean is a sea of opportunities, a region where newly discovered resources can and should promote cooperation and economic prosperity. But prosperity needs a bedrock of stability and security. That's why the United States is working with all our allies and partners across the region to promote regional stability. First of all, the United States encourages all states to resolve maritime delimitation issues peacefully in accordance with international law. This is true in the Eastern Mediterranean as it is elsewhere. We remain deeply concerned by tensions between our NATO allies, Greece and Turkey, over unresolved maritime boundary disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean. The United States welcomes Greece's and Turkey's announcements that they're ready for exploratory talks on maritime delimitation issues. The United States believes that diplomatic engagement between the two parties is the only way to de-escalate tensions, and we continue to strongly support Germany's mediation role in this regard. We also support NATO-led technical deconfliction talks to reduce the risk of miscalculation or accident in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greek-Turkish tensions are not the only point of contention in the region. Turkey's continued hydrocarbon exploration and drilling activities in waters off Cyprus are provocative and raise tensions. We've raised our concerns privately and publicly. And while we're working to address these areas of regional instability, we are concurrently deepening our security and economic ties with our allies and partners. For example, on regional cooperation, the United States continues to strongly support the 3+1 forum with Cyprus, Greece, and Israel in the fields of energy, economics, and counterterrorism. Secretary Pompeo demonstrated his support with his participation in Jerusalem in March 2019, and the United States government remains committed to supporting this important forum. The U.S.-Israel relationship has never been stronger, and Israel's relationship with Cyprus, Greece, and others in the region is closer than ever across a wide range of issues, including trade and energy. Another example of our deepening ties to the region is the growing U.S. bilateral relationship with the Republic of Cyprus. Since we signed our statement of intent with the ROC in 2018, we have made great strides in our security cooperation. In July, the United States invited the Republic of Cyprus to participate in our International Military Education and Training Program, or IMET. On September 1st, Secretary Pompeo announced the decision to temporarily waive export controls on direct commercial sales of non-lethal defense articles and services for the Republic of Cyprus. On September 12th, in Cyprus, Secretary Pompeo and Foreign Minister Christodoulidis signed a memorandum of understanding to create the Cyprus Center for Land, Open Seas, and Port Security, or Cyclops. And yes, a lot of work went into that acronym. The Cyclops will provide expertise for the rest of the region on border security and non-proliferation. The ROC has also made significant reforms on anti-money laundering since its 2013 financial crisis, partly due to ongoing US and EU engagement. The February 2020 Moneyval assessment of the ROC's anti-money laundering regime was positive and noted no significant deficiencies. However, Russian port visits continues to be a problem. We know that all the Russian military vessels that stop in Cypriot ports are not conducting humanitarian missions in Syria, and we continue to raise our concerns with the Republic of Cyprus on these visits. On the People's Republic of China and 5G, we also continue to stress the risks of relying on communications infrastructure from untrusted vendors like Huawei and ZTE, which are subject to PRC government control and represent direct threats to privacy, data integrity, and critical infrastructure security. Meanwhile, in Greece, the United States is continuing our positive bilateral engagement. As President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have said, the relationship between the United States and Greece is at a generational high. The signing of an update to the U.S.-Greece Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement in 2019 allowed us to begin important work at military facilities in Larissa and Stefanovikia. The United States supports Greece's ongoing efforts to diversify energy routes and supplies throughout the region through projects like the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which will begin delivering gas from the Caspian Sea to Europe this year. The interconnector Greece-Bulgaria and the planned liquefied national gas terminal in Alexandroupolis will also support this effort. Last week's visit of U.S. Development Finance Corporation CEO Adam Bowler demonstrated U.S. commitment to helping Greece revitalize key energy infrastructure like the Elefsina shipyard and ports of Alexandroupolis and Kavala. We have also seen tremendous progress in our trade and investment relationships, with investments in Greece from innovative U.S. companies like Pfizer, Cisco, Microsoft, and Deloitte. Moving eastward, the United States wishes to see the strongest possible relations with Turkey, our long-standing strategic partner and valued NATO ally. Turkey is a key ally facing profound internal and external challenges. Ankara has contributed to a range of important NATO missions in Afghanistan, Kosovo, Iraq, and the Black and Mediterranean Seas, which have advanced regional security and counterterrorism initiatives. Turkey also generously hosts nearly 4 million refugees. It is in the best interest of all of us to keep Turkey anchored to the West. A strong Turkey integrated fully into the alliance is good for NATO, good for Turkey, good for the Eastern Mediterranean, and good for the United States. The United States also strongly supports the Turkish economy, as evidenced by the June 2019 joint announcement by President Trump and President Erdogan that our governments will seek to boost bilateral trade annually to $100 billion. At the same time, however, there are significant and growing concerns in the United States with regard to a number of Turkish policies. As I said, we have expressed deep concern about rising tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean and Turkey's drilling and exploratory activities in the waters off Cyprus. We have urged Turkey to cease its provocative maritime operations. We objected strenuously to Turkey's July 2019 procurement of Russia's S-400 air defense system. The S-400 is fundamentally incompatible with NATO systems, and especially with Turkey's founding membership in the F-35 program. And as a result, Turkey has been suspended from the F-35 partnership. We also object to Turkey's continued engagement at the highest levels with Hamas, a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization. This harms Turkey's standing in the international community. Moreover, the United States remains gravely concerned by democratic backsliding in Turkey, including indictments of leaders from civil society, media, political opposition, and business, along with their prolonged pretrial detentions. The rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and association are fundamental values for any democracy, and they're important to Turkey's vitality as a vibrant, knowledge-based economy. As in any relationship, we must work together to address and overcome these stress points and areas of fundamental disagreement. The strength of our partnerships across the Eastern Mediterranean are paramount, because while the United States is committed to promoting stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, Russia and China have taken on a destabilizing role. In Syria, Russia has for years enabled the criminal Assad regime's vicious campaign against the Syrian people. In its most recent report, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria again determined that the Assad regime continues to perpetrate crimes against humanity. At the United Nations, Russia and China have repeatedly used their veto power to choke off cross-border humanitarian assistance to Syria, threatening the well-being of millions of displaced and conflict-affected civilians. Russia also plays a malign role in Libya. Russia is fueling the conflict through the continued influx of military equipment, advanced fighter jets, and by its surrogate, the Wagner Group. The United States opposes all foreign military interference in Libya. Ultimately, Russia seeks a foothold in Libya that will likely threaten core US and NATO interests. Russia is doing everything it can to divide European partners and NATO allies over Libya. From bases in Libya, Russia could directly threaten Europe and US assets and personnel stationed across the continent. Russia would also be able to influence the flow of migrants through Libya to Europe, use Libya's hydrocarbons for regional leverage, and thwart counterterrorism efforts. As such, we simply cannot accept any arrangement that undermines the United Nations or allows Russian military and its surrogates to remain in Libya. And this is a message we consistently reiterate to our NATO allies and European and Arab partners. The only end to the conflict is a political solution, and the UN-facilitated intra-Libyan dialogue has made significant steps toward charting a credible path to national elections and reconciliation, barring any self-serving machinations by Russia or other spoilers that could undermine the political process. The PRC is also a destabilizing force in the Eastern Mediterranean. Beijing's state-owned and state-backed enterprises don't play by the rules the United States and the EU follow. They undermine fair trade and competition, and once they buy their way into a market, they turn that economic position into political leverage. The United States sees Huawei for what it is, an arm of the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance state. We are working with allies and partners in the Eastern Mediterranean to keep predatory PRC investment out of the region. In contrast to malign actors like Russia and the PRC intent on destabilizing the region and investing in transactional relationships, the United States remains strategically committed to promoting long-term regional security and prosperity. And in the long term, a prosperous Eastern Mediterranean is the only possible way through which regional security and cooperation can be protected and preserved. The United States will continue to work with all our allies and partners towards these goals. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today, and I look forward to having a conversation.
Think you very much indeed, and thank you for that very wide-ranging talk and introduction. You've certainly covered a lot of ground. I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I hope that you'll be able to stay on and answer some questions that have come in from our audience and some from myself. So I guess anybody who hasn't been following developments in the region very closely might think that the US has suddenly got intensified its involvement in the region just in recent months, perhaps in response to recent developments in the Eastern Med. But that's not the case, is it? And I think if anybody who has been following developments can see that over the past year, there has been 18 months, intensified involvement by the US. So you gave some reasons as to why that is, but it obviously predates recent incidents. So what is driving this intensive engagement? Is it what you were just talking about, so-called malign the actors in the region? Is it because the US has become particularly concerned about China's increasing influence in the region? And I guess my question is, do you not think that China and Russia have legitimate interests in this region as well? After all, it's a Chinese company that has been involved in the development of Piraeus port. Russia has energy interests in the region and so on. So is there not legitimate grounds for them to be involved in this region?
Sure. I mean, let me begin, if I may, by underscoring that the United States has never been other than actively engaged in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is a place where we have important relationships, we have important partners. We have remained and will continue to remain deeply and profoundly engaged in events and developments across the Eastern Mediterranean space. I think what you may be seeing and reacting to is an effort by the United States to approach the region not so much as a series of hub and spoke bilateral relationships and partnerships, but as a coherent strategic space that requires a broad, coherent Eastern Mediterranean strategic approach. And this is in part driven by increasing competition in that space, great power competition. You can look at the national security strategy of the United States, which has at its core competing for positive influence around the world. And in the case of this region in particular, in the Eastern Mediterranean. So it's a region that has our attention. It's a region that has sharp focus, and it's a region that's getting the visibility I think that it merits as an area of growing competition and growing geopolitical and strategic import. In terms of Russian interests and Chinese interests, do they have interests in the Eastern Med? Sure. I think the real question, though, is what are their ambitions for the region? How do they match up with the interests that the region itself has identified for its own future and its own equities? And to what extent do Russian and Chinese aspirations align with regional aspirations? And I think the answer is really not very well. The United States has an image, a vision for the Eastern Mediterranean that is built on cooperation, that is built on shared values, that is built on a region that is working together to manage shared challenges and shared problems. The Russians and the Chinese prefer to divide countries against themselves, deal with individual countries on an individual basis, and leverage those areas where they have advantage to privilege the Kremlin and Beijing's plans and goals. We would like to see this region integrated into the international system and working well, closely, and cooperatively together. All you need to do is look at the role the Russians are playing in Syria and Libya in particular to realize just how malign their presence has been.
Okay, thank you very much. So what about Turkey? I mean, you did talk about Turkey. To what extent is Turkey still a reliable ally for the US and NATO in this region? And is it not inevitable that with America's strengthening ties with Greece and Cyprus, that will have an adverse effect on its relations with Turkey, or do you not see things that way?
I don't think there's an automatic trade-off between good, close partnership between the United States and Greece and the United States and Cyprus and the U.S.-Turkey relationship. The U.S.-Turkey relationship is deep, it is strong, it is founded in history. And right now, not to make too small a deal out of this, it is deeply challenged. It is a relationship that has a number of very significant problem points that we're doing our best to work through. And I identified a number of these in my opening remarks. The S-400, the domestic situation, what's going on in terms of Turkey's maritime operations. Right now, I would add to that the Caucasus and what's going on in the Caucasus, and Libya and Syria and elsewhere in the region where we have had some profound differences with Ankara. We can work through these, and we are committed to working through them. And we are committed to coming out the backside of this with a relationship, an alliance partnership with Turkey that is strong and healthy, and a Turkey that is anchored in the strategic West.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to get in two quick questions and hear your thoughts on this. Energy diversification. Why is it so in Europe? Why is that so important for the US? Is it realistic to think that Europe can become less reliant on Russia? What about the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline? Will the US go ahead with its threats to sanction European companies that are involved in that project? And just related to that, so how important is what's happening now with the hydrocarbons exploration and development in Cyprus? and in the Eastern Med? How important is that for you in terms of this diversification strategy? That's the first question. And if we've got time, I'll ask you one quick one.
Sure. What we're supporting is security through diversity of supply. And it's natural and entirely appropriate, I think, that Europe would source some of its energy needs from Russia. Russia has significant energy reserves, and they're very close. The question is the extent to which Europe should allow itself to become dependent on an unreliable single source supplier. And I think most of our European partners would agree with us that diversity of energy sourcing is fundamental to European security and a firm economic and financial foundation. Is it realistic that Europe can reduce its dependence on Russian energy? Of course it is. And we already seen any number of projects and programs that are out there that are accomplishing exactly that. In my own AOR, just looking at the Eastern Med, the Alexandropoli FSRU, in the Balkans, you have the Kirk Island LNG facility. Let's talk about another facility in Albania. There's interconnectors being built that will allow for LNG through Alexandropoli to reach into the Western Balkans and ultimately up into the European pipeline infrastructure grid. All of these things are supportive of energy security through diversity. I think you see the same thing with efforts to develop the Eastern Med gas fields. And I know there's a lot of talk about, well, what's the most financially reliable or workable solution for getting these gas resources to market, whether it's through an Eastern Med pipeline or whether it's through the facility in Egypt or a facility in Cyprus. And I think the market forces are going to drive that to a great extent. But however those forces ultimately shape that infrastructure, having the Eastern Med gas online, providing gas to Europe, will go a long way towards supporting and ensuring European energy security, which is in the interest of the United States as much as it is in the interest of our European partners.
Okay, one final very quick question. Thank you very much for that. EU summit is happening later this week, and obviously some of these issues are going to be discussed there. You mentioned that you've been in very close contact with Germany and your allies in Europe. Is this an example of transatlantic cooperation, something which many people think has waned and even wilted in recent years?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can look at the collective approach to managing frictions in the Aegean and the Eastern Med as really an excellent example of transatlanticism. In the Balkan space, I think we've seen really tremendous cooperation and partnership in trying to resolve a number of outstanding issues. So yes, I do believe that in the Eastern Med strategic space, that the interests of the United States and the EU are almost 100% congruent. And we have good, positive conversations with our partners and our allies about how it is that we can work to position ourselves to promote this shared vision of peace, stability, prosperity, and multilateralism.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Palmer. Thank you very much for joining us and for covering all that ground and for answering all those questions. I think we're very well set up now for our first panel, where we're going to turn and look in more detail at the business opportunities in the region. So thanks very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much to you for having me today. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Goodbye.